Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tell It Slant. My name is Jennifer Reimer, and I am the new coordinator for the low residency MFA program at OSU-Cascades. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you guys here this evening, albeit remotely. I'm actually joining you from the other side of the Atlantic on the Spain-France border in the Basque country, where it is in the middle of the night. But even so, I am thrilled about tonight's lineup. We have a great program for you. Tonight, we are celebrating the MFA program. We are celebrating publications that have come out of this MFA program. We are celebrating our amazing MFA students and our amazing MFA faculty. I'm just going to go ahead and get started here by telling you just a little bit that you might want to know about our MFA program. We are a low residency program, which means that we have students and faculty who join us from all over the place. Right now, we are actually quite global. We have folks who participate from all over the world. We have writers who are working on poetry. We have writers who are working on short fiction, long fiction, and also creative nonfiction. We're very diverse in that respect. We have an excellent team of faculty who themselves are also joining us a bit globally right now. What else can I tell you? I think I will leave it up to the writers and our faculty readers to let them show you what we're all about. But before we introduce our first reader, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, who's going to explain to you guys how our audience Q&A is going to work. Nathan, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. All right, so again, welcome to this event. We're very excited to be putting this on tonight. For audience participation, like a lot of our OSU Cascades virtual events, we are going to be utilizing not only the YouTube chat, for those of you that are logged in currently with your profiles, but we are going to be using mentimeter.com. Again, it's a very, very easy process. You can actually go directly to the website, use the QR code scanner that we're going to actually provide for you on screen, or just go to menti.com, so menti.com. Tonight's event code that you're going to use is 5742774. Again, that's 5742774. We're going to get to as many questions as we can, but again, we have a very, very full evening tonight for some great content. So look forward to seeing your questions and have a good night.
Thanks, Nathan. I just want to echo that we definitely encourage feedback from everyone who is joining us tonight. Especially those of you who might be unfamiliar with MFA programs or unfamiliar with our particular MFA program. We would love to interact with you as much as we can in this virtual format. So tonight's headliner is my colleague, Beth Alvarado, and let me just introduce her to you briefly and tell you a little bit about her latest book. Beth is the author of 4 books. Jillian in the Borderlands, a cycle of rather dark tales, is her latest book. Anxious Attachments won the Oregon Book Award for Creative Nonfiction and was longlisted for the Penn Diamonstein Spiegel Award for the Art of the Essay. Her 2 earlier books are Anthropologies, a Family Memoir, and Not a Matter of Love and Other Stories, which won the Many Voices Prize. Awesome prize, by the way. In 2020, she won an Oregon Literary Career Fellowship. For much of her life, Beth lived in Tucson, Arizona, with her late husband, Fernando, their 2 children, and a large extended family. She now lives in Oregon and teaches for us, OSU-Cascades Low Residency MFA program. Her essays and stories have been published in many fine journals, and 3 essays have been chosen as notable in Best American Essays. Her latest book has already received a lot of praise, and I'm just going to read a couple of the blurbs celebrating Jillian in the Borderlands. So Jennifer Sang says, with the ecstatic knowledge of an ancient curandera and the playful storytelling prowess of a child, Alvarado travels great distances, bears witness, presages problems, and intuits solutions. She isn't just at the forefront of white writers writing about race. She's at the forefront of people writing about what it means to be human and how we might survive our own dangerous shortcomings. Masterful and original, her voice has been here since the before time. In a world that needs healing and vision more than ever, it would all behoove us all to listen. And this from Allegra Hyde. Relentlessly musical, heart twisting, and haunted by the supernatural, Jillian in the Borderlands is a masterpiece of contemporary fabulist fiction, told in a kaleidoscope set of shifting points of view. These stories take readers to boundaries, both geographic and metaphorical, between sickness and health, wonder and horror, the past and the present. Quote, women are always searching among the dead and the wounded, observes the collection's titular character. As the lives of constellating characters make clear, however, what women find is much more complicated. Without further ado, welcome Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And I also want to thank, of course, Lauren Seifert for putting everything together. And it was a lot of work with so many of us because we kept adding more people as more people got books accepted and prizes won. And I also want to thank OSU for supporting this reading. So I will. And also, I just want to say how happy I am to be here reading with the other readers. I think it's going to be a great celebration. So I am reading just a little section. This is the cover of Jillian in the Borderlands. It's Kimi Izeli, a writer in Tucson, did the cover art. And this is from a story in the middle of the book. It's from Dear Juana of God. And in this story, Jillian and her mother, Angie, have taken Angie's sister, Glenda, to Magdalena, Mexico to be cured by Juana of God. Later, much later, Jillian will wonder why it did not surprise her when Juana of God went directly to her mother, as if Angie were the patient and not Glenda. But of course, because Juana was in a trance, not seeing the world as it existed in front of her eyes, but seeing instead some version of it painted inside her own mind, Juana of God moved toward Angie, and she put her hand on Angie's shoulder, and Angie put her hands over her heart as if she were indeed the supplicant, the person who was in need of healing. The voice that came out of Juana of God's mouth this time was in an ancient language, so ancient that none of her assistants understood it. It was a language of trees growing, or of magma from deep in the earth, or of ancient water, a language without words. But Juana seemed to understand it, and Jillian, as she drew, understood it in her muscles and bones. For she could draw so quickly as if she were drawing a movie, as if the drawing was causing the events to happen and not merely recording them. Juana of God lifted Angie's shirt, and there was Angie's smooth white stomach with one dark mole right below her left breast. Juana plunged her hand into Angie's stomach, right through the skin. No need for a knife, no need for an incision. Even the assistants gasped. Even the shadows on the stage gasped, and the spirits who were moving among the supplicants seated for invisible healing, they all gasped. And Juana drew out of Angie's stomach a large black stone, like a river stone, pure black, heavy, worn smooth by millennia and millennia of water running over it. She handed the stone to Glenda, who took it in her hands and pressed it to her cheek. Juana pulled stone after stone out of Angie's stomach until there were 7 stones. And after each stone, she handed it to Glenda, and Glenda held it first to her cheek and then cradled it in her lap. No one could believe that 7 such large stones had been housed in such a thin body. After the last stone, Juana of God seemed to look at her own hands, for she held it one to the sky and turned it back and forth, and then she waved her hand over Angie's stomach, and the skin was smooth, healed, as if it had never been broken. Jillian continues to draw, and in her drawing, her mother floats up above the stage. She seems very happy. Jillian draws a large house below her, and in the house, she draws her grandmother and Stevie Jr. She draws Bella knocking at the front door. She draws the handsome American doctor, the one from the Ivy Leagues who was on Oprah. He comes up on the stage to help Angie with Glenda. He loves the smooth stones, holds them to his own cheek one by one. And then he takes Glenda's face in his hands and she whispers, "What?" Jillian cannot hear, for her head is bent over her drawing. But they are the first words Glenda has uttered since her accident. And although Jillian does not believe in fairy tales, she knows what kind of woman her aunt is, a woman who is only happy when she is with a man. And so Jillian draws her floating up out of the wheelchair, and she and the doctor are flying slantwise over the stage as if they are the bride and groom in the painting by Chagall. They have left the stones that burdened Angie below in the wheelchair. Angie begins to sing, a song like a lullaby, and everyone, including the spirits, including Juana of God, including Junie the channeling Chihuahua, everyone feels as if someone invisible is cradling them. Sutures, visible and invisible, anywhere within 50 miles, melt and leave no marks. So that's the end of the section that I wanted to read to you. Next, I am pleased to introduce Irene Cooper, who is going to be our next reader. By the time I came to the program, Irene had already graduated, and so I've always known her as a poet chef who writes novels. At residencies, we all gathered around Irene in the kitchen, for her words fed us as much as her food did. Since graduating, she co-founded the Stay Project, an online space for creative souls, with Bee Van Hoen and Laura Winsberry, two other alums. She also started the Blank Pages workshops and salons with her husband, Mike, who is also an alum. These salons, even though virtual now, are a mainstay of Bend's literary scene. Now we are celebrating her novel, Committal. Tonight, we're celebrating her novel, Committal, which has just come out, and a forthcoming poetry collection called Spare Change. Okay, Irene.
Shucks, Beth. I don't know what I'm going to like better, the readings or the introductions. From Adrian Rich's poem, Planetarium. A woman in the shape of a monster in the shape of a woman. The skies are full of them. West Haven. The child lay on a white sheet on the table. The doctor gripped the blonde beechwood handle, stained tawny with age and perspiration, and swirled the instrument in a final revolution before removing its 8-centimeter steel spike from the girl's prefrontal cortex, soft as butter, and out her eye socket. He lay it beside its viscous twin on a cream lace cloth covering a mahogany sideboard next to a small electric console, from which 2 wires emerged, ending in the pair of round discs that echoed the half-dollar bruises on the girl's pale temples. The room and the patient had been arranged for an audience. Tension, as hope, was high. The procedure, a transorbital lobotomy, had taken only 10 minutes. The guest rose in a congratulatory hum and retired to the adjoining room to soothe their nerves and take refreshment. 8 heavy armless chairs faced the table, each silk-upholstered cushion dimpled and warm from its recent occupant. The skin around Lucy's orbits blackened like spilled ink. She opened her eyes, breaking the dark room with a meteor gaze. The cold metal hardware of the restraint pushed into her wrists and ankles, and she felt the muscles in her legs and arms contract and twist into one continuous knot. A woman appeared at her side and laid a hand on her shoulder. "Doctor." The man who had just taken the ice picks from Lucy's brain entered the room and set a glass of whiskey on the sideboard next to the instruments, suffusing the air with smoke and splinters. "There's our patient awake." The man shined a light into Lucy's eyes. He pressed a stethoscope to her chest under her cotton gown and listened to her heart beat. He did not undo the straps. "Capital, capital," the doctor said to no one. To the nurse, he said, "Take her to her rooms then. Tomorrow we begin the real work, full steam ahead. By God, we've done it. Our Lucy will be a brand new girl." As the nurse wheeled the table to the freight elevator at the back of the mansion, Lucy closed her eyes and tried to imagine her mother. But instead of the lovely face of Maggie Sykes, there was only a thick blue frost and the drowning sound of ice cracking against glass. We're going to skip ahead a dozen or so years. Chapter 6, Lucy and the Word. Lucy touched a spot on the beveled edge of the table, and a holographic screen came to life mid-room. The image revealed a view of the latest version of her global positioning software, Searchlight, soon to be adopted by corporations and governments worldwide. This was the future, visible and suspended for a few final days in her office. She recited under her breath, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." No, she thought. It wasn't any goddamn word that came first. It wasn't some reckless thing ill-formed and half understood. No. In the beginning, there was light. Then came the nothing, and then the fire, searing, cauterizing fire. After came the word, the words, endless tangles of words stuck in your teeth, clogging your ears, lodged in your throat, binding your wrists, lost in your brain, words to lure you into dark places, words to still you. Lucy did not herself speak until she was 16. In her oldest memory, generated, she believed, in utero, she recognized the sound of her mother's voice, but distinguished no specific language, no words. Instead, she experienced the sound of her mother as positioning, as place. After the lobotomy and the therapies, Lucy could speak. She developed a voice, and with it, an extraordinary vocabulary. She developed as well, according to her medical team and anyone who spoke with her, an unprecedented grasp of the nuances of speech. In a single year after she began to speak, Lucy could converse fluently in all the Romance languages, as well as Arabic, Russian, Farsi, Japanese, Mandarin, Hindi, several Inuit dialects, any language introduced to her, in fact. It seemed all Lucy had to do to converse with a native speaker for an afternoon. And she learned not only the rudiments, but the subtleties of a tongue as well. It was an extraordinary gift, not one that was anticipated. The men who came to the Institute to speak with Lucy sometimes left weeping, moved by the way teenage Lucy's grasp of their native tongue recalled a grandmother or a whole lost village. Jasper stood in the doorway of Lucy's office, watching her watch her creation. "The word, Jasper, the word. I believe I have chosen well at last. The bloody word may or may not have started it all, but it sure as hell is going to end it." And I have a tremendous pleasure now. Yola Gomez is a first-generation queer Chicanx femme and non-binary, anti-fascist, anti-racist sex rights worker activist. They are co-editor of Red Umbrella Babies, an anthology, as well as co-creator of Eugene's QTBIPOC Healing Collective. They will read from their forthcoming hybrid memoirs, We've Always Been Weeping and Searching for the Dead. It is my great, great pleasure and honor to introduce the viscerally authentic, always incandescent, Yola Gomez.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? I hope so. Ahlan wa sahlan, ismi Yola. Hola, me llamo Yola. I just want to first acknowledge and take just one brief moment to state my position as settler on Kalapuya land. And I'll begin and I'll read through 4 different pieces without breath, hopefully. Some things are troubling long after the resolve. They float and disperse and then coalesce and reconvene to create a moment from the past that you wish you'd entirely forgotten. This is my life. These are the memories that collide and collapse, that are difficult to retrieve and sometimes unbelievable. A memory like a stain, like stains, become us. Impressions of accumulated experiences that exude through mannerisms and matrilineal lines. I've spent my life piecing memories together, but remain fragmented and not quite whole. A stain of a person. My greatest fear is living as though through the lens of pieces of nearly irretrievable memories. My fear is that I'll spend my life staring out of some window, slowly disappearing, no longer living, maybe becoming my own haunting, a ghost. Soy excesivo. Based on research, on meta-analysis, the propped up door on my shitty camper says I'm prone to a certain percentage of things. The cat piss all over the carpet adds to the data. The cigarette butts and whiskey coke with the fly legs upright spinning are footnotes. My tangled hair and missing and chipped teeth, my stick and pokes are doctor's notes about how my pain is a lie. My name in the world means I can't talk to your manager, means I have excessive wait times and have had my rental applications denied. Sigo esperando para soñar. And I remember Coatlique's skirt twirling and birthing through born down teeth. I testify through codices and faces carved into stone, and we grime our primitive knowledge through cellular memory. I want to go back. I want to remember with a strength that would force my return to pre-traced body. Coatlique, she said. I ache as ritual. And so despite my being born as dead, I ache to live and am resurrected. I am excessive. Soy excesivo. The shit in the bucket. And she says she pretends to resist, that this is a kind of simplification. I take my hair and bite the ends off. Clothing from boxes, from hands that I would hold. History has aborted this shackle, readjusting transmissions. The owl of Minerva sits in a raptor center. She's been hit. She can't survive in the wild anymore. And she's our educational ambassador now. I see a baby turning white. I hear a baby dying now. There's something supple and then a droopy thing comes and violation is 9 o'clock news. Without artificial interference, a beautiful legacy of shaking free from abuse. You could be a hero too, huh, mama? White low heels, chunky with some stains here and there. And she says she makes things simple, faking that resistance. My sister is floating in the pool face down, and that sound of a scream made me laugh only after she was scooped up and rescued. Memories like this from the gift and how we became more complicated when we actually began to resist. And we stopped shitting in a bucket, celebrated the flushed out house. That is laughter from pain. And she sang, Dua Diddy. In the space between each breath, a listening blooms. I can hear that blue over reeds and heat, and I can smell those summer foods too, and how dead he should have been, he truly should be. When he sings Dios bendiga too, breathe life for the living, and Abuela waves a hand in front of her face like a spell in motion. Quietly, she says, shoo, shoo, flies, shoo. Abuelo, the sun went down, dust particles previously unnoticed, separated, took shape, touched me there, and I learned to evacuate. My body turned casket, turned burden, and I played with my doll. Her face was dirty like mine. I told her she was a bad girl. Abuelo said, ¿Quieres? Pushing his beer toward my 5-year-old mouth, I said, Mommy doesn't let me. It was over in a flash. And then there was agua de Jamaica and de las Rosas. There were pig's feet on a stick, that we could play with or eat. In the kitchen, between thick brown thighs of tias chattering, a forest to protect me, a cow's head sat on the counter, tongue protruded out, the smell of lengua and spices cooking into the dusk, forcing me to awake. Too young. I sucked my thumb, and Tia Consuela slapped my hand away, shoving both my thumb into a cut. Open jalapeno. We speak worlds through moving hands, exaggerated facial expressions. This is our way of making. Iatrophobia. Alabaster glory, sing high, a broken hand in a cast of camel hair and corn silk, giving us pan de muerto, calling children like the earth, renaming them as soiled, as spoiled, a doctor, a priest, telling us we don't feel pain. Dollar store rosary draped across martyr statue. We squint, our mixed eyes looking for worship, but see a ring around the reddish-orange sun. We know, and a quinceañera crown is smashed into desert dust, all of us, traitors, holding hands. We got this, and we got this. Mouth open, 2 tunnels through time and mutts throughout history, swallowing pills, eating the flesh, aborted, mummified, still pushing up concrete, still growing around dumpster wheel, made to kneel, head down, palm forward. A bell rings, and big-eyed boys and girls are sitting, obeying, trying not to hear the voices telling them to run, admission of guilt, for living and not dying, for collusion with the enemy. It's written on our hides, pelts worth nothing, not pure but dappled things, imprinted with soured milk, smelling of burning cities and spit from an authorial mouth, kowtowing for fetishes, for knights in shining armor, being driven toward our own death. We shall inherit the earth, if only after Zucchetto heads have rolled, or doctors grow ears. Thank you. And now I will introduce friend, colleague, former alum, Tiffany Cates. Tiffany Cates spent 5 years navigating Chicago's transit and weather systems before moving to Oregon and earning her MFA in creative writing from Oregon State University. Influenced by her degrees in philosophy and psychology, Cates writes around themes of personhood, matters of free will, and the distance between self and other. She co-founded the Townsend Literary Journal for long form fiction, is a developmental editor through Townsend, and facilitates 3 to 4 day intensive writing workshops 3 times per year. And she's absolutely wonderful. And it's you now, Tiffany.
Thank you, Yola. I'm going to be reading from M Theory. The morning the lady in the blue coat drifted from one who came and went to one who was considered and categorized. Donovan James wasn't just running little girl hitting daddy late, or even gutsy deaf man late, but the kind of late where absolutely nothing around him looked familiar, and therefore everything looked new and mildly alarming. It was his first day back after Christmas. He'd overslept, skipped his shower, spilled coffee on his pants on his way out the door, and by the time he was ascending to the platform, he could hear the thunder of the 7:31 train pulling in, and then the ding-donging of the doors as they opened. To one unfamiliar with taking public transit, the art of it may be lost, but there is, in fact, an art. For Donovan, this involved the utility of door placement and the convenience of exiting. When exiting at Armitage, Monday through Friday, this meant riding the third-to-last train car and entering the front door. On this morning, however, Donovan breached the top of the stairs just as the doors were closing and had to jump in before they could shut him out. Third-to-last train car, back door. His bag caught in the closing process, inspiring the spastic opening and closing of the doors, their accompanying ding-donging, and the pre-recorded voice that kept shouting, "Doors closing," though it was clear they were not. He was by no means the first person to cause such a scene, but frequency didn't dampen the humiliation of being caught in a stuttering situation. After 2 very long seconds and several convulsive attempts, he snatched his bag through the momentary opening and tried to ignore the train operator's din. Do not attempt to board or alight this train while doors are closing. A phrase he had heard many times, just never directed so personally at him. Looking up, he tried to avoid noticing anyone who had noticed him, but the appearance of a contained flame drew his attention. The red and purple of the rising sun shining in through the window behind her had created the illusion of something dangerous until his mind interpreted the speckled white face glowing at its center. It was surrounded by a flame of hair, a mustard yellowed stocking cap, and the robin's egg blue of her down coat. The lights flickered as the train lurched forward, and he couldn't help but determine it was her, zapping the electricity from the train as her pink lips suspended themselves with an upward tenderness that said, "I've been there." A smile that informed him his insertion into the scene had not just been observed, but considered. Standing among the crowd of people bulked by the layers necessary to survive a Chicago winter, he felt momentarily cocooned by their anonymity until other remembrances of the blue coat and yellow hat began to tickle his conscious mind. The blue coat ran. The blue coat waited. The blue coat watched the world and read weird books. But the blue coat hadn't had a face until that morning. She'd lacked the utility of other writers. She hadn't had a regular routine that allowed any of Donovan's attention to be drawn to her. But her smile, the smile she'd given him, left the lingering sense that she'd been the unobserved observer for more than this singular encounter, and that made him uncomfortable. It had been years since Donovan had felt the cruelty of being someone's entertainment, years since he'd discovered running as a form of therapy to keep his mind balanced and his words flowing. But her smile prickled elementary day fears of attentions being drawn to him because he was the sickly kid with the stutter. Like the door, like the door, like the door. His bag caught in a loop of unutterables that had drawn her attention and awareness full stop in his direction. And that's it for me. I'm now going to be passing it over to Jenna Goldsmith. Jenna actually had not joined the program by the time I graduated, but her name was very familiar. I know it's okay. Lots of people wanted you for on their thesis committee, and so your name is very familiar to me. Jenna has a book that is available for pre-order right now. It's a poetry chapbook, Suppose the Room Just Got Brighter. And she will be reading to us now.
All right, can y'all hear me okay? All right. Thank you, Tiffany, for that intro and for telling me that. That's very useful to know. I want to thank OSU-Cascades and everybody who was involved in putting this together. This is, we're like 6 months into this, but we're also, this feels very new and weird. So thanks for everyone taking the risk to do something like this. Okay, so I am going to read 3 poems, and these are all from the chapbook that is coming out in February from Finishing Line. And it's occurred to me that Irene also has a book coming out from Finishing Line, and we should have some kind of like party, if we can, where there's like a finishing line and we run through it together, holding hands. Okay. Let there be light. I have known extreme gestures of love and no gestures of love, both. Let the rows on the quad go along with me to poetry class in late afternoon. The contents of my dorm spilled, homemade poetry journals full of homemade poems ripped and returned in a plastic baggy. There I save you from falling down the high school stairwell so that you might avoid damaging your perfect mouth. And you steady yourself only to trip again, and I grab your forearm and waist, and this is perfect. The second fall was on purpose, but of course it wasn't, and you married a dentist and became one yourself. Be it the Louisiana heat, an air unconscionably wet, we board a train away from graduate school to Chicago for a proper Chicago blizzard on South Side streets, where I still might be, even now, dragging my suitcase in the snow. Light these first lessons, that no matter how good the good can go, in a flash of blonde hair, wild down the stairs, outstretched arms, clothing and textbooks, wheels jammed up. Even now, I marvel at these most heartbreaking scenes repeating. This one's called Heart Gut. In poetry group, I tried to explain how aspiration, inspiration, travel, inclination, listening, funding, working, closing the eyes, beginning again, pulling the drawstring tight, unfurling one's own flag to surrender, writing one's own story to quell the bother, rubbing the sharp edge of one's longing to round the fall, crescendoing a song, singing that giving up, letting the feeling of feeling. In the circle of poets, that's what the poem teaches us, that technically the heart can be left out, that technically heart equals aspiration, inspiration, travel, inclination, listening, funding, working, closing the eyes, beginning again, pulling the drawstring tight, unfurling one's own flag to surrender, writing one's own story to quell the bother, rubbing the sharp edge of one's longing to round the fall, crescendoing a song, singing that giving up, letting the feeling of feeling. Heart gut. Finding one end of the string and finding the other end of the string and bringing the ends together to tie into a knot. Recovering a memory. Virginia Woolf, Writing on an Empty Stomach, and how this translates into ways in which we keep ourselves empty so that we may be women. Ruminating on love. Always writing the longest poem. Every day waking up to the longest day. The opposite of heart gut is heart outside of gut. Aspiration, inspiration, travel, inclination, listening, funding, working, closing the eyes, beginning again, pulling the drawstring tight, unfurling one's own white flag to surrender, writing one's own life story to quell the bother, rubbing the sharp edge of one's longing to round the fall, crescendoing a song, singing that giving up, letting the feeling of feeling. Heart gut. Can any place be home? If I put sagebrush in my mouth, will I become here? Sit me in a covered wagon, isolate me in the tall trees. Okay, this is the last one. It's the title poem of the chapbook. It's called Suppose the Room Just Got Brighter. Suppose the room just got brighter. Suppose the cherries on the neighbor's property were for us, so that when we snuck out in the dark, we weren't stealing. Suppose the door wasn't rotting from the bottom up. Suppose the wind. Suppose the green hose a snake. Suppose every garden box a garden. Suppose the room just got brighter. Suppose the vultures flying above the mudflats had an eye on our hair. Suppose the ocean was seamless rivers. Suppose the rules weren't so rigid, no consequences when I don't follow them. Suppose there were no consequences. Suppose we ate supper and everything was exactly your favorite. Suppose supper. Suppose the direction you were running was west and I knew because you ran into the sea. Suppose I sat at the window and waited for you, awed. Suppose I saw you coming back. You were as wet as anything, sopping, still floating, very wet, simply walking up the street. Suppose I had waited there watching, struck. Suppose the room just got brighter. I sat in my high tower above the sea, and every wave a whale, every rock a seal's face, every clam and crab in communion, caverns in the bay, buzzards in and out, wind, toil, food, the sea, the tide, taffy on the table. Suppose the cherries under a midnight moon were ours. Suppose the moon, suppose the cherries. That's it. Okay. I have the good fortune of introducing Bridget Lewis. I'll say a little bit of personal stuff, but here's what you need to know about Bridget Lewis. In addition to winning the Iron Horse Review's chapbook contest for origin stories, Bridget is the co-founding editor of Utterance, which I highly recommend checking out. And a contributing editor to Entropy, where she started and curates the Talking Cure. She is also a visual artist. If you get Irene's book, you'll recognize her work on the cover of it. So if you get Irene's book, it's like just a lot of OSU-Cascades MFA stuff going on there. I had the pleasure of serving on Bridget's thesis committee when she was in the MFA program. And I was astounded at the quality of the work. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing her reading it again now, a couple years later. So Bridget.
Jenna, thank you. I was going to say, if you didn't mention that you were on my thesis committee, that I was one of the people Tiffany mentioned who just had to have Jenna Goldsmith on my thesis committee. So thank you for that. I am going to be reading an excerpt from a very short story that appears in the chapbook that I have coming out in December. I'm not going to give any context, so it's weird if you know about it and it's weird if you don't, so we'll just go with the don't. The patient known as Anna O was the first patient of psychoanalysis. She wasn't his patient, but the treatment itself was documented by Freud. I can't remember his name, says Lilith to Eve. She's trying to remember the name of Anna O's actual analyst. It doesn't matter, says Eve. Lilith and Eve are drinking wine on the patio in Eve's garden. It is late summer, and the dahlias this year are showstoppers. The flower heads loom large over the two women, each of whom are reclining in wooden Adirondacks. So, says Eve, old what's-his-name was her therapist. Yeah, says Lilith, that's right. Old what's-his-name and Anna O came up with the idea of talking, free association style, together. Just saying whatever came to mind. That's where it comes from. She said it felt like chimney sweeping. Lilith takes another sip of wine. She can't really remember why she started telling Eve about this in the first place, but really, what does it matter? The two of them can seemingly talk about nothing for hours. The mind can get really clogged with soot and ash, Eve says. That's the truth, says Lilith. She sighs. She knows she has to leave soon. She'd rather not. Sitting here with Eve, she suddenly realizes that it's possible she's been lonely of late. It feels good here, sitting, drinking, talking. For once, Lilith feels like she's the one being held and rocked, cooed and cradled. You should stay for dinner, Eve says. Your husband would hate that, Lilith says, bringing herself to her feet. You mean your husband would hate it, Eve says. Lilith understands that Adam is different now, different than the man she was with so long ago. It isn't jealousy that makes her want to leave, but an inability to reconcile that the 19-year-old version of Adam, insecure about his own masculinity and wanting to exert his dominion over her, could be entirely gone. He was different now. This Eve told her time and time again. He's changed, she would say. I believe you, Lilith would say to Eve. And she did. Or at least she believed that it was possible to change and possible to be someone else entirely when you were with someone else entirely. People, like the stuff of physics, exist in relationship. Everything that was contained in something smaller than a single atom. Imagine this nothingness. Can you? Nothingness with possibility is like the whistle of an arriving train. We know what's coming. Bringing to mind what's been is harder. What was the train, you might ask, before its whistle sounded, before it arrived? Did it even exist? Was it just the possibility of a train? This is a poor metaphor for the Big Bang, immediate, sudden, momentous. There was nothing, and this nothing contained all that's come to be. There was nothing, and this nothing was smaller than an atom. There was nothing, and then there was something. The conditions for complexity aren't easy to achieve. This is why it's crazy that we're here at all. Did you know that in some versions of the story, Lilith was made first? If you ask her, she'll tell you that, though it was long, long ago, and though it might not matter much now, yes, this version is the truth. There was nothing. There was the possibility of something contained in a space smaller than an atom. Lilith was made first, Adam shortly after, out of the same materials. Like clay figures, they were born of the earth and fashioned into human form. In the first second after the Big Bang, energy congealed into matter. Lilith laughs. This story, though it is the truest version, is still but a story. Lilith, like you, wants to know what happened before the Big Bang. When Lilith left Adam, she left by train. Not the most expedient way to escape a bad marriage, but she wasn't so much looking for expediency. She wanted to be deliberate. She had a choice, and she was taking it. Truth as a human concept. Oh, no, just kidding. I'm done. I decided I'm not reading the last page. Oh, so thank you, everyone. I can see little claps going. And we're going to move into the Q&A section now, and Beth is going to facilitate that. And I want to take time to say, and I think I can safely say this on behalf of all 6 of us, just to thank you for choosing to spend time with us this evening. We're really grateful that you are here with us, and we can't see you or read your words at the moment, but we look forward to seeing some of your questions. So thanks again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for reading, and thank you for the questions are already coming in. So we do have some questions. First we were going to answer one question that we made up for ourselves, or I made up for us. And that is, how does your work relate to the theme of Tell It Slant? And so, and how conscious are you of writing, that your writing is witnessing something as you're doing it? Is that something that you're conscious of or not conscious of? And I can say for myself that when I started writing Jillian in the Borderlands, I was, politics of the Borderlands were informing what I was writing, but I wasn't really focused on that when I was writing. I was much more focused on the characters. But as the politics of the Borderlands became more extreme, they rose more to the surface of the book. Like as a writer, I still was not really focusing on the politics, but they were more in my consciousness, and so they appeared more in my character's consciousness. So I don't know, I think maybe we should just, all the readers should unmute themselves so we can actually have a conversation instead of just going person by person. So I don't know who would want to take up the question, like how is your work, either the work that you read or the work that you do in general, tied to the theme of Telling It Slant? Yola, you want to go first? You're in my screen.
Oh.
I don't know if
Sure,
you're.
I guess I was thinking of the poem, by Emily Dickinson, Tell the Truth, but Tell It Slant. And it kind of in our program, I think we investigated this idea. And what does this mean? I think there were a lot of folks who decided that telling the truth, but telling it slant was that most people can't handle the actual truth. You have to add some kind of awe or something magnificent to it, or maybe make it really subtle so that it's not, in her line where she talks about the child and thunder, so it doesn't frighten somebody away. I was thinking of it in terms of, I guess, to kind of bring it back to a hauntology, like a Black feminist hauntology and respectability politics. So what does it mean to tell the truth in that sense? And so you talked about witnessing. I often talk about testifying and what that means to witness and testify and to get that back and forth with people and the truth. And when there's, for lack of a better term, like the amen in the audience, and we're testifying our truths in that particular way. I was thinking of it in those terms, but also just like that rejection of respectability politics, because I've been taught so often to sieve everything that I've done through a particular lens for a particular audience, whether it be academia or through what we call canon, especially in our program, which we were very fortunate in our program to not have that, to have instructors who were willing to go against that and to really bring us our contemporaries who happen to be Black and brown and indigenous and queer and trans. So those were definitely in the ether, if you will, if someone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think that it comes from Dickinson. It comes from that poetic aesthetic. I don't know if anybody's been following the Dodge Poetry Festival, but this is one of the benefits of this Zoomosphere is all this access.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been, every single thing I've watched on that thing has been a hit out of the park. And I, for the first time, heard Vivi Francis speak, whom I've never heard speak, and was only passing acquainted with her work. And turns out we're the same age. And she stood there, completely composed, but also, and showing up, but also saying, quite frankly, the slippage, and we talk about slippage a lot in the poem and in the work, the slippage that has occurred in the last 6 months socially has sort of allowed for this, to hear. You said something beautiful, Yola, a listening blooms, a listening has bloomed. Yes. And I think when she was talking about showing up in the 1970s, in taking a seat at the table, as they say, in second wave feminism, and she said, I could not be heard. I could not be heard as a woman of color trying to tell her perspective. And she's still showing up 50. No, she's not that old. She's 56. So she's still showing up these many years later to say, can you hear me now? But without sort of, not like, giving them the finger, can you hear me now? But like, can we hear each other now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would like to jump in really quickly with the topic tonight. Tell It Slant was exciting to me because my protagonist, Donovan James, is a character that I intentionally set out to make very human in ways that we don't always acknowledge within ourselves. And so a lot of the things that Donovan will think, or that Donovan will say, or that Donovan will do, I personally don't believe are very far removed from the average person. And so for me, telling it slant is to project this character and how the reader reacts to the character as they follow him down the trail is meant to kind of be a mirror for them. And
Mm.
so I was incredibly interested in the title, in the purpose of telling it slant, because I feel like Donovan tells it slant about each and every one of us, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tiffany, you bring up something that's really interesting, especially right now, considering that, you know, the current crises that we're in, with the deep divide. How do we write then for people who are or who have the potential to change their mindset? And there is this oftentimes split where it's an all or nothing. What does it mean to meet in that middle? Right? Is that something that you're talking about with writing somebody who is very human, who is faulty, maybe even?
Oh, he's faulty.
And then coming out of that, or like the way that we interact then with your work would mean kind of like a consciousness raising?
I'm hoping. Ideally, that would be.
That's what I'm hearing you say, and I think that that's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Well, Bridget, this question makes me think of your work too, because of it was maybe kind of segueing to another question, which is about both drawing on older narratives and resisting those narratives in your work. There's a way in which you draw on the narratives from the Bible, but then you're doing this revision with them. And I don't know if that is one way to tell it slant, or.
I think it is one way to tell it slant. And I think
Totally.
even to back up a little bit, in the section that I read, there's a line about things existing in relationship. And I have always thought that about, story, that different stories, the intersection between place and people in stories, especially with myth and especially with cosmological stories, the stories of where people may have come from are very influenced by place. And just looking at how those things necessarily interact, a person who is willing to take a giant leap, just then can take a giant leap into that, stories really live in, modern stories really live in relationship with, the people and the times and the place too. So,
Right.
Yes, so Origin Stories, my chapbook, it consists of 5 flash pieces, which are just really short stories, and they're all reimaginings of biblical tales or characters. So in this one that I read from, Eve is in there. She appears in another story about her and Adam. And in the same way that myth sort of exists in a place of timelessness, these stories are more modern, and they're now, there's DNA kits that show up and, things that are of this time and place, but there's still a sense of timelessness. And there's usually a scientific component that comes in as well to sort of challenge the notion of the original message of the original myths.
I would say too, Bridget, when I think of the stories, I'm lucky enough to be familiar with origin stories. This is also, this, like, there's nothing modern about sex, but I think that the idea of this sort of characters being influenced about their sort of endorphic journey, so it takes, is a very different look at these biblical stories, which are full of all that humanity, but not really narratively guided by, corporeal moving bodies. Yeah.
They're very full of that. I worked hard to find a section that didn't have that to read tonight.
And when you're talking about stories and places, I was writing Jillian in the Borderlands is from all these different perspectives. And I was thinking, that was not something that I did. I knew I was writing from these different perspectives, but it wasn't until after the book was written that I realized how appropriate that was for a book that was set in the Borderlands. You know, the whole idea of there not being just one story, the different voices, and they all have kind of like equal weight. But Jenna, you haven't answered yet about our theme. Did you want to?
Yeah. I kept thinking about the second line. Well, I guess it's the third line that we don't, it's like the line of the poem that never gets said because the first two lines are so powerful. And it sort of, like drops off. And I was thinking about what that line means. The line is success in circuit lies.
Yes.
Success in circuits. And I was like, okay, like what what does the next line mean? And I don't know. I really to the like tens of 10 people watching or however many people are watching, but I really don't. And I've been sitting here just trying to think that through a little bit. Because that also there's, the rhythm of the line, it's a powerful line in and of itself. So I don't know. Does anybody want to like help me in like contemplating the power of the third line and how it like continues the work of the first.
I love that you're dissecting it in this way. No, really, because I was thinking of it in sum total. I was thinking of it more in terms of what are you left with? The impression of Emily Dickinson. So when you walk away from her, what is it? It's 6 lines. What is there? What remains? And I work a lot with this, with stains, with memory, with being haunted. And so I did not ever think to dissect it line by line. And so taken like that, just as its own thing, is actually really incredible to think about. And it's something I'm going to think about.
I love the question too of what can Emily Dickinson possibly mean by the word success?
I know.
What can she possibly mean by that? And that's, and I think about that, just that very word, forget the line, just that word.
Yes.
In an Emily Dickinson poem. Like, what does that look like? What is that?
Totally. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the I Ching. There's this thing from the I Ching that says success lies in finding the right way of approach. And so to go in a circular way, not to go directly on, was kind of what you started with, Yola, that sometimes what we need to do is, go around things in order to get to them, in order to help people see them in a different way. So
I think that's the key of the third line, by the way. No, seriously, the circuit and the different perspective is what is going to show the truth successfully, depending on the person.
Yeah, that each truth is dependent upon each person's personal experiences up to that moment. You might all get to the same truth, but each and every one of you have a different experience, different circuit.
A different circuit. Wow. And kind of on that note, we have a question that asks, do you all have any writing rituals to get into your best mood for creativity? So like, how do you find that circuitous route? And now I'm going to tell you, because, I'm always having to trick myself, and it's very hard in the pandemic. I find myself having a hard time even, I'd much rather play with my daughter's twins than sit at a desk and think. None of my rituals are holding up. So I'm anxious to hear if anyone has something I could try.
I definitely have a ritual, but you all know this already.
Tiffany.
This is for you, Jenna. I get up between 3 and 4:30 in the morning, 6 days a week. And I have my clothes waiting for me and my coffee waiting for me, and I let my cats outside and drive to the office. And then I sit in front of my computer for at least the next 4 hours. And sometimes I cry. It's definitely part of my ritual sometimes. But other days I feel really great about it. So, yeah.
So the butt in the chair theory?
Butt in the chair, yeah.
The chair theory.
That's real talk. That's like author, writer, real talk right there. Like this veneer of like amazing, just springing from our, well, not springing from your brains, just fully formed.
Oh no, that's giving me way too much credit. I just wake up early. That's all. That's all there is to it. I wake up early and try to take advantage of the time.
Do a little circuit training, a little bit of circuit training on the way to the office.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't know if it's a ritual, but it's a way of life. So I've been on tea for about 1.5 years. And that has caused some really interesting spasms in my relationship with my co-parent. I went from sort of being asexual to being like, hey, hi. And so we're polyamorous. And so I think interacting with multiple different people on multiple different levels and experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety and heartache has been very helpful for my writing. So I highly recommend being really stressed out with multiple different people. That's my writing ritual. Also being non-binary and if you're AFAB, get on T and totally flip out for 1 year. So.
I don't know.
I'm just going to wake up early if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that too. My writing has been great though.
Yeah.
So.
I light a candle. Just kidding. I don't. I want to be the opposite of Yola. Like, what is like the complete lamest way to like follow up?
Yeah.
Well, are you writing right now, Jenna? You're writing right now, aren't you?
I'm writing right now. Yeah.
You pen trick.
That's amazing. I can't do that trick.
Well, maybe so. Okay, so this kind of, about the ritual kind of leads to another question, which was, do you remember having any kind of specific breakthroughs as you were working on this project? As a writer, was there any moment where you were like, oh, Irene?
Yes.
I'm passing the mic. Yes. One of you go first.
Yeah. Jenna, you said yes, you had a breakthrough.
Yeah, I think like feeling okay with writing about myself, which seems rather obvious, but the collection, the chapbook is it's very lyric. Like it comes out of that tradition, which had not at all been how I was trained. I came out of a program that, we read a lot of language poetry. We read a lot of, poetry from the 90s, which I still love and read, but I didn't have a sense that it was like okay to talk about myself in my work. And it was, it is okay, of course, to talk. It's okay to, you do whatever you want. And obviously at the time of writing, that was important, and it's not something that I planned. It just happened. And I let it happen. So that was a surprising breakthrough. And I don't know if that will continue. Right. I don't know if that's what, future projects are going to look like, but I think that was a surprising breakthrough in a way, because I was able to like talk about myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tiffany, you said didn't you say you had a breakthrough, Tiffany?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the use of internal monologue of my main character. I had a mentor who his number one advice to me was constantly make it louder. And I was like, what does that mean? And he would say something like, you'll know when you get there. And yeah. I wanted to say least helpful advice ever, but in all actuality, it was the most helpful advice. And
That's awesome.
it occurred during a residency. And I went back to my room and I was like, well, let's make this loud. And I did it, and I went back and showed it, and he was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So I was like,
Great.
all right, here we go. And it required a lot of letting go of control of the character, because I wanted to keep him safe and likable, and a myriad of other things, because he's like a child. But letting it go, just letting go is a major breakthrough, much like Jenna being able to let go and talk about herself. So yeah, thank you, Chris Boucher.
Yay.
Yay. Yeah.
Bridget.
Okay, I've got one more question. We're almost finished. And where did it go? This is an easy one. Who was the first person you told when you published, when you found out that?
I think I told Beth and Irene.
I think I said Beth.
Yeah.
Beth.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Beth and TC.
Yeah, TC.
Beth and TC, but you first.
Oh, I asked. That's that's the only reason I got to be first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My Vegetarian Alcoholic Press published Committal. Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, I'll say it again, is a poetry press in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, run by a guy named Freddie LaForce, who told me he wanted to publish Committal at 12:30 a.m. my time on a Saturday night. Well, I guess it was Sunday morning, which, might lead a person to be a little suspicious about. But somehow, and a Google search didn't help a lot, let me tell you. But at that point, at 12:30 a.m. on a Saturday night, my dear husband was in the other room, and I think I just blurted it like, somebody wants this. And he's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like,
I forgot to count my co-parent as a human being that I told first.
I would think
Beth.
But then after that dead silence for months and months, like the biggest, just sort of the secret thing happening.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, we only have 2 more minutes, and I don't want to let you guys go. And I wish we could see everyone who's listening. And
Me too.
It was a mistake to turn off the chat.
No, look at the YouTube chat.
Oh, there's a YouTube chat. Oh, okay.
Okay.
We're
and
popular.
Wow. Somebody wants
you're amazing, Jenna.
The last thing was talk about the benefits of having not only an OSU mentor, but also your peers. And I think that is kind of abundantly clear from our conversation.
Yeah, y'all are amazing.
Yes, you all are amazing. And It's been just so wonderful to read with you. And thank you again to
Yes.
OSU. And
Yes.
thank you to Jennifer for getting up at 3 a.m. or not going to bed
Yes.
at 2 a.m. or whatever it
Yes.
is in France. Oh.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, everybody, buy the book.
Tiffany, thank you.
Bye, Elsa.
Irene, Bridget,
Thank you, guys.
Jenna.
Thank you all. And to all,
A good night.
right. How cliche, but you know, I'm ready for a drink.
Bye. Adios.
Bye.
Masalema.
Bye-bye.